All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Samvera Virtual Connect. My name is Heather Greer-Klein. I'm the Samvera Community Manager, and I'll be your host for today. I'm just going to get us started with a little bit of housekeeping and going through some of our community guidelines and code of conduct, and then we can get started with our presentations. But we're so glad you're here. So yes, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please note that the webinar has live closed captioning available. The conference is being recorded, and after the sessions today and tomorrow, we'll have video available on the Samvera YouTube channel, and the slides from presentations will be available in the Samvera Community Repository. And attendees will receive links to both in the days after the event. We have a Q&A function, and we have a Zoom chat for your questions. We also have a Slack channel, the Connect Slack channel in the Samvera Slack. It's available for conversation today and tomorrow. And if you need access to the Samvera Slack workspace, there's a link on the Virtual Connect program where you can request access. And I'll have one of my fellow program committee members drop a link in the Zoom chat to our program. We also have collaborative community notes in a Google Doc, and you're welcome to help contribute to note-taking as we move through the day. So today's sessions will run for 3 hours. We'll have a 10-minute break, 50 minutes from the start, so just under an hour from now. And we'll have a 10-minute break after the first hour and 50 minutes. We've got an excellent schedule today. You can ask questions in the Slack channel or in Zoom at any time. If there's time for Q&A after a presentation session, a facilitator will read your question to the presenter. And if there isn't time, or if we run out of time for questions, presenters can answer in the Zoom chat or in Slack. The Samvera community has a code of conduct and an anti-harassment policy, and I'll discuss that shortly. First, I want to give a huge thanks to the planning committee who put this together. They are excellent. If you see them in the chat or if you see them in Zoom, they're also happy to answer questions, and they've been a big help this year. So just to talk a little bit about participating in a Samvera event. Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free community experience for everyone. From the very beginning, this open source collaborative has been committed to openness, transparency in all that it does, code, design, and discussion. So we're equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. Historically, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups have been excluded from technology work, and ironically from open source software communities in particular. The Samvera community is committed to removing barriers to participation wherever they exist. So collaboration is the heart of what we do, and we thrive to, this says thrive, we do thrive, but we strive to the full spectrum of contributions made by our community members. Collaboration, it's reflected throughout the work presented in this event, and we must ensure all feel welcome to contribute and all feel supported along the way. So these values and aspirations are part of the new community guidelines released just a couple of weeks ago, and you can find a link to them at the top of the Samvera Wiki homepage. Community guidelines express our values in the context of the everyday activities of the Samvera community, and they serve as the principles by which our members act and collaborate. They complement the code of conduct and the anti-harassment policy. The code of conduct expresses our expectations for respectable communication as we work and interact with one another. And the anti-harassment policy provides a framework to deal effectively with issues. Let's see, this policy is only one aspect of our broader desire to build a diverse and welcoming community that encourages participation and contribution from all participants without bias. If you see something missing, we invite your input to the policy and in making Samvera a better place. Building on the framework provided by these documents, each Samvera community member has a role to play in creating and promoting a welcoming and safe community. If a situation arises that may represent a violation of our code of conduct or anti-harassment policy, if you feel that you cannot or should not address it alone, please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the board, or a helper. We're well positioned and prepared to assist you. So here are helpers for today. You can look for them in Slack, in the Zoom private chat, and they're available via email. So to get the most out of the event, remember to have fun. Feel free to chat and meet someone new, learn new things, share your ideas and thoughts, and ask questions and help us move Samvera forward. So first up, to start our day, we have Adam Arling and Michael Klein and Matt Jordan from Northwestern University Libraries.
Heather, sorry to interrupt, but before we switch over to the introductions, John Dunn noticed that live captioning wasn't on. So if that's something that we do, are you able to enable that before the presentations start?
Oh, yes. Yes, it should now be enabled.
All right. Good morning. I guess we're getting started a little early, but hopefully everyone's here. I'm Matt Jordan, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm a front-end developer at Northwestern University. And I'm also joined by Adam.
Yep, it's Adam Arling, also front-end Northwestern. Go by he, him.
And Michael Klein, or MBK, was going to join us initially. However, you'll just be able to see him at a separate presentation today at 1:20 Eastern. So to get started, when our virtual connect came onto our radar, David, our product manager, asked us to speak about progress on our triple IF viewer Clover, which aims to handle image, sound, and video canvases. And we were thinking, well, that's a great idea, and I think folks definitely might be interested in that. However, some broader work we are currently completing in our digital collections refresh is much larger than any single viewer, which brings us to the theory. And the theory, well, it's not an ultra novel idea, but it is to simplify. And the way we'll do that is we will utilize the IIII Presentation 3.0 API to define a majority of our front end. And we'll be using 3.0 Fluent web components that will leverage manifests and collections, and in the end, speak to a modern web and its users. While beginning our refresh of digital collections, we began mocking out a few sample 3.0 manifests that fully represented our works. They included metadata, rights, summary, and other IIIF 3.0 descriptive properties. And to do that, we needed to analyze how users currently view our works. And so this is a current representation of a work in our digital collection site, Pantaloon Classico. Everything on this work page has been built out over some time since 2018. We have sliders in here and various components all tied together, rendering out our API data. Some of these components relate directly to the work, meaning like metadata down below here, or some might be related items such as the sliders as interstitials above, but they're all rendered with intention and of some relation to the item. The only thing, however, the only thing on the page that is IIIF Fluent is this viewer at the top. And here's that same work mocked as a IIIF Pres 3 manifest in Mirador. A large majority of the content for that work is now included here through a variety of IIIF properties. And someone viewing this manifest in Universal Viewer or Mirador should be able to comprehend and digest that same information on a digital collections website. So to recap, everything in this manifest can be accessed via its IIIF properties. And with that in mind, everything on our digital collection site in the various components from the header to the footer can also be a IIIF resource. And the keyword is can, but it's definitely possible. So it may go without saying, but as the modern web stands now, one IIIF viewer, or at least the idea of a viewer, cannot handle the full user experience for someone visiting our digital collection site. But what if we instead exploded the IIIF manifest and we thought about the manifest as properties that render out elements and sections of a unique page? And by doing that, the main HTML element becomes the IIIF viewer or the client. And the IIIF properties such as label, metadata, summary, thumbnail, and part of are now the HTML headings, the description lists, the sections, the paragraphs, the figures, and aside that lie within that main. Simply put, the data model is the Pres3 spec, and these properties are rendered to the DOM as HTML5 elements. So some background here. How do we get to this point? As a standard practice, we want to wireframe our ideas. And here's a basic mock of that work completed in February. After reviewing these, we annotated them and we identified IIIF properties that might house our data. You can see here the title is a label, the description here is a summary, metadata is metadata, etc. And then we thought about the components that might render those different elements of a page. And at the top in the header here, in green, you see Clover as our manifest items viewer for the image, sound, and video resources that might be attached to this work. In yellow, embedded throughout, is Nectar, rendering our IIIF descriptive properties as HTML5 elements such as label, rendering IIIF properties such as label, metadata, and summary as various HTML5 elements. And then finally down at the bottom, we have Bloom and red and pink in the footer. And that is our collection items viewer that would render out related works. These collections can exist as bespoke named collections in the way we tend to think about them, but they can also be built on request as a response in a IIIF collection shape. Altogether, these three components compound, and they can create a full representation of one of our works with Nectar as the primitive library existing within all of them. Okay, so that's the how, but why? And so using our own manifests will force us to eat our own dog food, as our colleague David says. And the byproduct of that is that it'll make our manifest more robust. And if we can rely on those manifests to represent our digital collections in the way we want to present them to the world, then those manifests are ready for the world to consume them. And if we use the IIIF presentation 3.0 API as our data model, it'll provide us a ready-to-use schema, cutting down on time that we would otherwise use to define our own custom data shapes. And also finally, creating intentional front-end IIIF components will benefit others as well as us. And we're no longer building sliders and other web components that only fit our data model. Our old friend Pantaloon again. And here is a code sandbox I pieced together. And I'll share a link with you in a bit if you'd like to play with it. At the top, we import Clover, Bloom, and Nectar, the three different libraries or packages. And then if we wanted to, and then this component also here is bringing in the actual manifest ready to go. And if we want to just pass to Clover the manifest ID, it renders out the items viewer or the viewer as we tend to think about it. And in the midsection here, I can pass to this Nectar label component, the manifest label. And I'm saying to this label component, I want to render it as an H1. And if I wanted to, I could render it as an H2 or an H3. All of these Nectar components here accept HTML attributes, and you can think about them that way. They are React components, but they will render out the actual HTML5 element and nothing more. And so I'll just go ahead and unmark these, and you can sort of see this is now spilling out onto the page as these various micro components that can sort of be moved around within the content here. And And at the bottom, if we wanted to build out an explore further section or a related section, we can use Bloom and we'd pass it various IIIF collections. The first one here is maybe the collection that this manifest is a part of. And then the second one could be one that's built on the fly, using that sort of search response idea where it's transforming that search response into a IIIF collection. And in this case, give me things that are of subject masks. So this is Pantone Classico in that way. But what happened if we wanted to see it maybe a different manifest? Well, here's a video work that we have in Clover, and you can sort of see how that's rendering. It doesn't have as much metadata. But what if we were to pass it one from a different institution? Here's one from the University of Tennessee. And this manifest here has a little bit more metadata associated with it. It's 20 items long. And you can sort of see how that looks as well. And then finally, here's another one from the University of Tennessee that is a video manifest. And you can sort of see Clover here with the VT2 transcripts being output as well. And all of this is 100% IIIF. Okay, I'm gonna pass it off to Adam now.
So as Matt is kind of been showing some of these components, it's part of the front end theory, maybe not as cool as the low end theory, but it's part of the front end theory. We've just really been trying to think about like simplifying and standardizing not only UI that we're building ourselves and we're going to use ourselves, but also things that we could build hopefully with other people in the future that anyone could use. So a lot of these could be used outside of just Northwestern context. And maybe just to highlight a little bit of why we're trying to like simplify and standardize and go in this direction. So again, this is a work that's being represented on our digital collections site that was built a few years back. And from a developer's perspective, if you kind of like look under the hood and see some of the code that was constructed to render this out to the screen. So here's just one of about 10 components, clocking in like 130 lines of code there. So there's a bunch of stuff that's been built to render out, excuse me, that representation of the work. Whereas where we're going is something that looks a little bit more like what Matt was showing, where a lot of the data on the screen in a full viewer is kind of abstracted behind some of these components, just reducing the code size. I think he squeezed it down to under 40 lines before this presentation. So I think the future direction, it allows us to move beyond just writing ad hoc components, which maybe fit like a Northwestern data model, or something that just lives in one developer's brain. And it's moving us to a mental model, like thinking about where we're writing components which use common languages amongst all of us, including IIIF and HTML. So again, the goal is trying to simplify and standardize. And for us, that extends into the developer experience. And I think the question that we're trying to ask is like, what tools can we use as developers, which ultimately yield the most productive output for end users? So I'll just walk through a few technologies that we're kind of using in some of the components that Matt has been showing, and how they really improve our developer experience. And then in turn, we again, hopefully can pass that on to the users. So React and TypeScript, that's been our library, our JavaScript library of choice for about a little over 4 years. Northwestern to build UI components, and kind of one of the main benefits of using React or Vue or whatever you manage your application state and all kinds of event handling, which is just a lot easier to handle in a framework or library as opposed to like vanilla JavaScript or say jQuery or whatnot. TypeScript is relatively new to us, which has benefits not only on the developer side, but also for consumers. So if people are pulling these components into their applications, it allows them some insight into the data model, which is, again, kind of reflected by the IIIF spec. And then finally, because we're using the React ecosystem, we're exporting in each one of these components, Bloom and Clover in particular, just like a top level component, which your application can import. So if you're using one of these, you don't have to like pull in some giant app, you can simply import a single component. Another technology that seems to be popular in modern like front end stacks is the idea of using these kind of like primitives or building blocks. We've been using a package called Radix UI. There's others like Headless and whatnot, but the general idea behind these is you import these in your front end components or applications, and they're just unstyled primitive UI components built on web standards. So for example, in this little screenshot to the left, like maybe the text input box or a button, a submit button, or a list of linked data, all these are like Radix primitives that we build on top of, and we can kind of like extend either in their presentation and their styling. We can add extra event handlers to them, extra data on top and whatnot. And the advantage of starting out with these like building blocks, they're just like out of the box area compliant. You get accessibility out of the box, so you're not like recreating the wheel. It's a lot of work to make some of these like HTML elements to just have everything like accessibly compliant. So that's definitely one of the main benefits. And also the composability behind these. You can take these individual primitive components and really be creative with putting them together, building more complex pieces of UI. Another front end, I guess, kind of like tooling that we're leaning into pretty heavily is a lot of the work that's been in conversations that have been happening in the IIIF Commons neck of the woods or the world the past couple of months. Two packages in particular that we found pretty helpful. Or again, the IIIF Commons. So I guess the gist of what's been going on there is kind of consolidating like non-visual UI component like helpers. So it'd be like code to help like process, manifest, and not necessarily like the visual side of things. So an example of one of those is a package called Vault. And for example, what this does for some of our applications, so we'll pull Vault into, say, our image or our items viewer, and we throw a manifest at Vault, say it's like a super complex, deeply nested manifest, and Vault will normalize that data and kind of like flatten it out and give back to the front end a much more reasonable data shape to work with and process and parse and whatnot in our front end. Vault also will convert presentation 2 manifest to 3. So you could throw either presentation 2 spec or 3 spec at Vault, and you get back a flattened presentation 3 structure, more or less, which again, on the front end, just allows you to simplify your code, and it's less that you're writing, and you kind of streamline things. We're also have been making good use of some of the types for TypeScript users that Stephen Frazier over at Digerati has spent a lot of work on. So you may be asked, am I getting tricked into using JavaScript or React or whatnot? And absolutely not. But you could maybe imagine a world, say you had like a Rails application, and a Rails app imported React as a dependency, And you just take a little piece of, say, like a Rails view, and you wrap that with a React render of some sort. And then you could import any of these components that Matt showcased, and you could kind of like compose your own little like viewer within a Rails application, for example, and you don't have to go full on into React world, I guess. So where can I see some of this stuff? So we've been pushing a lot of this code up to Samvera Labs. So we encourage everyone or anyone who's interested to go check out any of the packages shown today. You can kind of dig in and see what we're doing, collaborate with us. That'd be awesome. Get some documentation, see how to use it. We've also been creating like static builds of these to really let people kind of like play with this stuff and like see how it works. So you could click here and throw some of your own manifests in here and see how they render out. Also, if you want to see some of these components, how we're kind of like pulling these into production environments, we'd invite people to check out our NUlib, GitHub, and especially Meta and the digital collections to see how we're kind of consuming these. And then lastly, we've been pushing them up to the Samvera Labs organizations. So anyone, across the world is open to check these out and use them, whether they're inside or outside the FFF communities. I think Matt last week got contacted by a DJ in Rio who was interested in maybe using something like Clover for DJ sets. So yeah, just thinking about like extending this for any and all use cases. And that's it. We'll throw some links, I guess, in the chat or whatnot if people are interested. And we trimmed it down to under 20 minutes. That was our big goal this morning. So I don't know if there's any questions, but.
All right, last call for any questions for Adam and Matt. Thank you both. That was really interesting. All right, and hearing none, up next, we have some interest and working group updates. So we have updates from the HYRAX interest group, the HYRAX maintenance working group, and the HYRAX Valkyrie development working group. So I'll let Julie and Lynette take it from here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I am going to share screen. Get things started here. Squish everybody up. All right. There we go. So you can see slides. We're good. Okay. Hello, my name is Julie Hardesty, and I'm speaking to you today from the ancestral homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. This is the land on which Indiana University Bloomington sits. I'm using this space to recognize this fact and that we must do more to make the IUB campus a more supportive and inclusive space for Native and Indigenous students, faculty, and staff. Lynette Rail is presenting with me today from Cornell University. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Cayuga Nation. The Cayuga Nation are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of the Cayuga Nation dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of the Cayuga Nation people, past and present, to these lands and waters. These reminders may be just words, but those words do mean something, and that this reparative work continues. I'm also the HYRAX product owner within the Samvera community, and I'll be giving you an update on the HYRAX interest group and the HYRAX maintenance working group today. Lynette Rail will be giving an update on the work to Valkyrize HYRAX, which means making HYRAX work with storage backends other than Fedora 4. So first up, a little bit about Hyrax. Hyrax is a software engine built using Ruby on Rails that can generate a digital repository application for discovery, access, and management of digital collections. That application is currently built to connect to the Fedora 4 digital repository, and backend changes are in the works to allow for connections to other digital repository backends, such as Postgres and Fedora 6. That backend work is what we refer to as Valkyrie. If you know about Haiku, Haiku is using Hyrax for each of the tenant applications that it is running. So now the Hyrax interest group update. We'll start there. So as the product owner for Hyrax, I facilitate the Hyrax interest group meetings. These are open to anyone interested in checking in on what's happening in Hyrax. We have discussed all sorts of Hyrax happenings, from release announcements to the pledge drive, to position descriptions for finding the next Hyrax tech lead and the next product owner after me. There's a lot of information shared and a lot of topics discussed, but it doesn't take a lot of time to tune in and catch up. So we meet once a month on the second Wednesday of every month at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. The meeting is 30 minutes right before the Samvera Tech call. So in fact, our next meeting is next week on Wednesday, May 11th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And this is in fact an open invitation for all of you to join us. So up next, I'll move on to the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group update. And the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group is a group of folks from the community who regularly participate in working on the ever-present backlog of issues reported about Hyrax. They also support new feature work brought into the Hyrax codebase and help with testing and verifying changes before Hyrax code releases. Daniel Pierce from Indiana University, Rebecca Kotze from UNC Chapel Hill, Tao Zhao from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and Jessica Hilt from UC San Diego are the current members who have been serving on the working group by participating in cycles of sprints for 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. Our current cycle just ended for January through April of this year, but many of these folks have actually been participating at least since January of 2021. So that's going on 1.5 years. They really are superstars and are keeping Hyrax work moving forward. In addition, we have a Samvera maintenance pledge drive that we're trying this year. And for the January through April cycle, the Hyrax maintenance working group pledges have added up, and we have also received some spectacular help for Hyrax from pledged hours completed by Adam Arling and Matt Jordan at Northwestern University, Fritz Freiheit and Connor O'Malley at University of Michigan, and Ayub Balemli, Brad Watson, and Emily Porter at Emory University. They've helped to close issues, test features, and keep our maintenance work moving forward. So you too can pledge hours to the Samvera community by contacting Heather Greer-Klein, the Samvera community manager. One result of this effort is the closing of 15 issues from the Hyrax backlog. 10 of those were bug fixes and have resulted in improvements to location information for works, clarifying and improving in documentation, improving file versioning features, and seeing works go through the mediated workflow correctly. We've also seen code contributions from folks in the community outside of pledged hours that have helped move things along. So Rob Kaufman, Alicia Evans, April Rieger, and Sarah G at Software Services by Scientist.com, formerly Not8, they contributed code that updated analytics in the dashboard for Hyrax 3.3.0. Tamsin Johnson and Alexandra Dunn from UC Santa Barbara contributed in addition to the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group and pledged hours for the 3.4.0 release. And each of these releases has included more Hyrax Valkyrie work. So Lynette Rail has been the main force behind that work, along with Tamsin Johnson and Alexandra Dunn at UC Santa Barbara, Chris Colvard from Indiana University, Jose Blanco from University of Michigan, and the focused efforts of Anna Headley, Trey Pendragon, Sean Ellis, and Elliot Jordan at Princeton University during this time. So I hope I'm not leaving out anyone, as there have been many people who have contributed so far to this effort. And this work is still ongoing, and Lynette is going to talk about it in more detail, but bear with me here as I try to kind of talk through a little visualization and see how I think this work is going to be progressing. So Valkyrie work is happening behind the scenes so that it can be incorporated alongside how Hyrax is currently, how Hyrax is currently working now and does not get in the way of the current functionality, which is using Active Fedora to connect to Fedora 4. It's a bit of parallel work, but this provides the advantage of having this new pattern and these new backend capabilities available for testing and development, while features like analytics and other release updates are still being made. This has also resulted in the Valkyrized adapter for Active Fedora known as Wings, which is available alongside the current Active Fedora connector. All right, so once Valkyrized Hyrax is ready, that is a major release and we'll have a Postgres adapter ready to use. The concept we have for this release is that it will continue to provide Active Fedora through Wings. So the Active Fedora connection that is being used now to Fedora 4 is still possible in the initial Valkyrie Hyrax release. This version of Hyrax will be available for a time. And the idea would be that you could update this Hyrax without changing what you are using as your backend, and then move to Fedora 6 or Postgres or something else if you have another adapter for a backend in mind. A later major release of Hyrax would then remove Wings, taking out Active Fedora and simplifying the overall code base. So thank you for walking through that visualization with me, and we can discuss further if there are edits to be made to that, but that's my current understanding. So another big area of work for Hyrax is maintenance work to upgrade to Rails 6. We're currently using Rails 5.2.7, and that version is reaching end of life on June 1st. To be able to use Rails 6, we need to upgrade to Blacklight 7 and Bootstrap 4, and those upgrades have to be done simultaneously. Work has been happening gradually for a while to reach that point where we can upgrade to Rails 6. Margaret Keeby at UC Santa Barbara started the latest round of upgrade work in January before the Dev Congress, kicking off the BL7 Bootstrap 4 branch in GitHub that's linked here in the slide. Matt Jordan and Adam Arling at Northwestern completed pledged hours at the January Dev Congress to continue this work, along with Dhananji Wathana from Indiana University. Brad Watson and Ayub Balemli from Emory University are working on this now, along with Daniel Pierce from Indiana University. So there have been quite a few folks involved, but there is more work to do to finish this up. Emily Porter and I are aiming to conduct feature testing on this branch so we can have a more precise set of issues to work through to complete this upgrade work. That's what we want to have prepared for the May Dev Congress. So work that week can focus on discrete tasks for this upgrade. So the May Dev Congress is happening May 16th through 20th. And this is an invitation not just to the developers and testers in the audience, but also to the managers and administrators who are tuning in. Join this effort by supporting your folks who are interested in participating. Give them a time to be part of this community. A little bit of effort from a lot of people makes a difference. Something we are currently missing right now from our Hyrax maintenance working group is a Hyrax tech lead, someone to help with sprint cycle planning, developer questions and pull request review, packaging and cutting releases, and helping developers become involved and stay involved in Hyrax development work. We don't have anyone in the community with all of the answers or all of the capacity to plan all of the technical moves going forward. We can't expect that, and we're not expecting that. The good news is that what we need is someone with the capacity to be curious and investigate and be able to make decisions based on what they learn. The other good news is that we need someone who can field questions and ask questions and can show by example that you don't have to know everything to contribute, and that all of you as developers can contribute to maintenance and feature development of the Hyrax engine, whether that's fixing bugs, upgrading gem dependencies, or reworking part of the engine for Valkyrization. What you or your organization can bring to the role of Hyrax tech lead is positive, and as an open source project, that's what we need to keep moving forward. The even better news is that the Samvera board has approved funding this role for up to $45,000 for 1 year. I see this as an opportunity to use that as a time frame, and within that time frame, stabilize a process so we can schedule the next person to come in as the next Hyrax tech lead after this time period. We don't just need a Hyrax tech lead right now. We need Hyrax tech leads, and we need the community to recognize that all of you are those leaders. The best news is that we do have interest from an institution in the community regarding this role. It's nothing definitive yet, but I am at least hopeful, which is nice. So we also still need the next Hyrax product owner. Based on my experience over the last year and a half as Hyrax product owner, I know there are others in the community who can do this and would probably enjoy it. You do not have to be an expert in all things Hyrax. You will learn by doing, and it is possible to do all of these things: planning sprint work, facilitating the monthly interest group meetings, running Docker on your work machine, writing release notes and documentation, testing issues in the web application. These are all concrete things you can do. You can schedule time to do it. You do not have to do this work all day, every day. The community is helping to figure out larger maintenance issues like tracking gem dependency schedules that can improve road mapping for HYRAX maintenance. Having a HYRAX tech lead again is going to make things smoother to bring in development work and developers. And I'm already here doing the product owner work. You can start dipping your toes in the summer with me and figure out how you want to do things as product owner by the time you begin in that role at the end of October. I have not heard any expressions of interest yet for product owner, but I know there are people who can do this and would be fantastic for HYRAX and for the Samvera community. So please get in touch with me and let's talk about it. And as always, we are taking pledges for Samvera community maintenance work, and HYRAX is one of the areas where you can pledge work. We have hex stickers and we are not afraid to use them. You can contact Heather Greer-Klein to make your pledge today. Part of that pledge work can be work towards Valkyrie. The Valkyrie work has been progressing significantly this entire time. And I think we are to the point where issues are defined and chunked small enough that developers familiar with Rails patterns can pick these up and work through them. Lynette is going to go into more detail now about that work, what that's entailed and where things stand with Valkyrie at this point. So I'll turn it over, stop sharing and turn it over to you, Lynette.
All right. I'm glad that Julie did the sort of overview of what this effort is, because I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about sort of the state of things. So there have been 5 dev congresses since May of last year. Each one has had a part of it that was dedicated towards the Valkyrization of HYRAX process. So across those, we've had 104 PRs. And if you look even beyond the dev congresses, there have been over 200 PRs that have gone towards this effort. And you might notice in the January and March dev congress, there was significantly more PRs, and there's a reason for that. So a lot of work went on ahead of these major recent events that I'm going to describe that set the stage for us to be able to do this. So starting in September last year, there was a minimal viable product that was defined. And basically that was defined as CRUD. So create, read, update, and delete of all the major components in HYRAX. And once that was defined, we were able to set up Neurax PG. And this is a HYRAX application that only uses Postgres. There is no Fedora in there. So Postgres handles the application data and as well as the repository metadata. So when we first set it up, I will tell you that not much of anything worked. We could bring it up, but a lot of the functionality wasn't there. But by November, we were able to do some testing over Neurax PG on that MVP. And by January, early January, it was substantially operational under that minimal definition. And this set the stage for us to be able to do release testing. So the release testing is what we do before we make any HYRAX release. And so it's fairly comprehensive on the features that we want to be sure are in place. And that testing set the stage where we could define really clearly what we wanted to do. The Dev Congress that happened in March was 100% HYRAX Valkyrization focused. And so the testing at that point was running about 18% before we started. So 18% passing, but you'll see that there were 71% that wasn't even tested. Now, some of that wasn't tested because we didn't have time, but a lot of that wasn't tested because there were blocking issues. And once this sprint was done, we were up to 35% passing and only 39% couldn't be tested. You could see the failure rate goes up, but that's because we did more testing. So we were able to identify more things that didn't actually work. And the most recent numbers that I have is that 52% of the tests are passing and only 18% can't be tested. So the big question is, where are things and what kinds of work still needs to be done? So there's a couple of areas that are really big. The nesting of collections, it's blocking 25 tests because it's just not working. And we need someone to spend some focused time on making that work. I put general work code next, and that's because some of the other areas you'll see there aren't any tests listed. And that's because those all kind of fall under the works. And those 18 tests that I list there are the ones that sort of fall into those other areas. So derivatives is a big piece of work that has been being worked on for quite a while. There's been significant recent work, and I know that it is really almost done. And so I think that that's really under control. Embargoes and leases, that's one of the areas that has a lot of work that needs to be done. There's more than 25 tests that are failing. So some of the other areas are sharing, analytics, and search. And search is doing pretty good too. We've had some recent work that cleared a lot of that up. So how do you get started? Because we would like to invite everyone to be able to participate in this. And I think it is at the point where you can do that now, because most of the complex infrastructure pieces are in place and functional. So we're now working our way out to the edges of pieces that aren't quite working right yet. So if you haven't done any Valkyrie at all, you can do the dive into Valkyrie tutorial. And there is also instructions on how to set up the DASI test app. These are all links in here so that you can find those resources. And speaking of resources, there are various resources that you can connect to help you along. You can always ask questions on the Hyrax Valkyrie channel. And then the last thing, of course, is to jump in and take an issue. So the other way you can help is we need testers to help keep this process going forward, because it's sort of an iterative loop. We fix something and then we see whether or not it fixed the release test. And sometimes it unveils other issues that have to be addressed. And so anyone who can do some testing is also very much grateful for that. So I do want to do a couple of specific shout outs. There's been some institutions and folks who've done a really big effort. DC for hosting NeurAx PG, Julie Hardesty for coordinating the testing effort, Tamsin especially for his technical leadership and just putting in that solid infrastructure that allowed us to do the work in parallel to other work being done in Hyrax. Surf Lanier for blazing the trail for using Valkyrie with Hyrax, and Cornell for providing me with significant amount of time to help move this work forward. Indiana for consistently providing developers to help us work on this, and Princeton for dedicating a full 2 week, their full team for 2 whole weeks. And then I did my best here on the list of people who have participated as developers, testers, and the institutions who have contributed. I hope I haven't missed anyone. It was a little difficult to pull that together, and also to just acknowledge that there were a lot of people before this work started. This year's work started that also contributed significant efforts. And you can help. Join us. The Developer Congress for May is coming up very soon. So I invite you to come and join us and be part of that effort that pulls this across the finish line. And that is it.
Thank you both so much. That was excellent. And thank you for emphasizing that we really feel like everyone can help at this point. If you have any questions at all, you can get in touch with Julie, ask a question in the Samvera Slack. Do we have any questions right now? We're about at our break time. I did see a question about if there's any effort to connect to S3 compliant storage with Valkyrie. I assume that's something that will be a more in-depth answer. So feel free to answer that on Slack. I am going to put into the chat to everyone the form. If you aren't already on the Samvera Slack, you'd like to join the conversation there, feel free and to sign up there, and we'll get you in as quick as we can. We're going to take a break now for about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, which I have as 12 noon Eastern, and we will see you back here then. Thanks, everyone. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to hand things over to Ellen and Ilke from the Advancing Haiku Project.
Hi there, that's not the right slide. We'll start with the first one. How about that? Aha. Can you see my slides okay?
Yep, looks great.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. I am Ellen Ramsey from University of Virginia. At the University of Virginia Library in Charlottesville, where I am speaking to you from today, we acknowledge that the land where we learn and work is the ancestral homeland and traditional territory of the Monacan Indian Nation. We pay respect to their elders and knowledge keepers, past and present. We acknowledge and pay respect to the enslaved Africans, enslaved laborers, and free Black laborers who built UVA, as well as their descendants. Today, we acknowledge the land, we acknowledge labor, traditions, and knowledge, and we acknowledge lives. Today's presentation is the final grant report of the Advancing Haiku Project, which ran from October 2019 to March 2022 and was funded by Arcadia, a charitable fund of Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. It only took me 2.5 years to learn how to say that correctly. Presenting with me today are Ilkay Holt from British Library, and helping with the Q&A session will be Elisa Barrett from Ubiquity Press. Just want to remind you what the project was and was not. You've seen this slide before if you've been to any of our presentations in the last couple of years. As I mentioned, who we were funded by and the time period. The goals of the project were to support the growth of open access through institutional repositories by introducing significant structural improvements and new features to the Samvera community's Haiku institutional repository platform. We did not build a new institutional repository solution. We tried really hard not to redirect resources from the Hyrax codebase and community, and we definitely don't claim that institutional repository population and its use is a singular path to the future of open and sustainable scholarly communication. You will see throughout the presentation some icons, and the rest of the presentation is mostly based on a document that we have shared with the community, and I know that the Haiku Dev Group has seen it and the Haiku Interest Group has seen it, and we are happy to share it more broadly, called We Advanced Haiku and You Can Too. This is not a complete list of the things that the project did, but this is sort of a top 10 of the things that are sort of easiest to explain, coolest to look at, and truly in the community code and available. So as I said, the icons, that lovely little ruby gem means just what you might think it does, which is that the particular feature is available as either a part of the Haiku add-ons package or installable as a gem onto a current version of Haiku. And there are lots of folks with better technical chops than I have who can help you with that. So just ask in the Slack or in one of the interest groups. The little haiku icons with the numbers are obviously, hopefully obviously, the numbers of the versions in which a particular feature runs and or which you would want to add a gem to. Again, I'm going to apologize for the technical things I get wrong all at once, and then I won't apologize again. A couple things we did not finish on the grant, and I want to express, first of all, appreciation to folks for already picking up some of this collaborative work. We've talked a couple of times with the Haiku for Consortia team and our AP Trust partners about preservation packages, and we're hoping that that work will continue in their project. Two other things that I really personally wish we had gotten to, but you know, we didn't, and they're open for adoption, are more reporting kinds of tools. So, you know, things like a regular email of, hey, depositor, or hey, author, you got this much activity on your work in the repository this month. We'd like to see that. And related to that, our metrics per article and work that are integrated with other metrics tools like Altmetric and Google Scholar. I know that there's some work on that I'm excited to see later in the Connect program, but we do have ORCID, and we'll talk about that. So what do we do? Cross-tenant search, and it does. This is actually a screen capture from the shared research repository at British Library, but you can see that there's a single way to search across tenants, which are the individual repositories within this multi-tenant instance. And you can search across British Museum, British Library, Kew Gardens, etc., with a single search box. And this is now part of Haiku 3. Auto expiration of embargoes and leases. This was also talked about a little bit in the Hyrax presentation earlier. Works better now. Previously, you could expire them, but they didn't actually turn anything off. And so that's part of Haiku 3 as well. DOI minting is a piece that you can now turn on or off. And that was really important to some of the partners who were responding to our community survey. Won't get into the discussions about when and how one should mint a DOI for what purpose, because that is still institution specific in a lot of ways, but there's at least the option to turn it on or off. And it does work with DataCite in this instance. This is a cool one. So you can autofill metadata fields with a DOI in a record, and you'll see the capture there. So I'm going to show you, this is the input form, put in the DOI, and then, oops, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. So that's for a single record. And then this is the one I have 2 slides on. The auto population of records with bulk DOIs. So you can put in a bunch of DOIs, and we're using the third-party unpaywall tool to resolve those and then put them into essentially a vetting list, which an administrator of the repository can then say, yep, 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 I want that one, I want that one. So that's how that works. And that's a gem that you can put into any version of Haiku later than 2, if I understand that correctly. Okay. Bulk import and auto population of records from ORCID and from DOIs. There's a lot of interest in this, and it's currently a Hyrax gem. We have a little bit of work on this. We've looked at it. There's a workflow that we've worked on as part of our Advancing Haiku project, but there's more that needs to be done. I was really excited to see the call for the bulk recs working group. Maybe this will go into Haiku 4. We'll see. This is a pretty easy one. This is research information systems citation export, so standard, Mendeley, Zotero, etc. This is a gem that you can add to Haiku 3. Okay, ORCID, this is a big one. This is currently in Samvera Labs, so you can connect ORCID with a profile, an author's profile within the cross-tenant repository instance. It's a gem right now. I believe, and Rob Kaufman can verify this, or we can talk about it later, that it's slated to maybe go into Haiku 4. So that's a question I'll leave open for folks who know better than I do. This is also a pretty cool one. This function allows you to use the hypothesis third-party tool to comment on PDF that is hosted in the repository. We did actually use this for editing the latest version of our reporting for the project. So we have run it, and it does work as long as you have hypothesis enabled. I'm going to turn it over to Ilkay Holt at this point, and she's going to talk about the next slide.
Thank you, Ellen. Hopefully you hear me fine.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Ellen actually summarized so far the list of main features delivered as part of Advancing HiQ project. So to be able to present you those main features and actually more of them in a most practical way, Ellen created an adoption path chart on a Google Doc, which I already shared the link in the chat and also in the Slack. Hopefully you are actually being able to see that table or chart. So I will try to explain this, complex thing, at one go. Let's see. So that adoption chart or part will give you 4 options in total to implement those features in your own repository. And to give you an overview of those options, for instance, the option 1, which is highlighted as green and in the circle, and the green circle that you see, that displays what comes with installing HiQ2 and later and higher versions of the software. So you can also see a few of the features spread around in the green circle. If you see a feature listed on that chart with an option 2, that means those features can be adopted as an individual plugin. With Ellen's, again, great interpretation, you can call this option as an a la carte menu. You can pick and choose, different plugins from that blue area. If you see the option 3 with the yellow circle and also the yellow highlights on the adoption chart, that is an inclusive circle in the slide. These are Advancing HiQ add-ons, whichever version of the HiQ that we use. They come as a fixed menu. If that's the right way of putting them, actually, they come as a package of gem and plugins. So these are toggled features which you can turn on and off, and but they come together as a bundle. That's I'm trying to actually just underline. As it says in this slide, if you want all of them at once, there is an option 4. You can always work with one of our service providers in the Samvera community to get these things done. I will just move on to this next slide. So one of the things that we wanted to highlight alongside the great work of feature development in this project is the community engagement. Since the beginning, we highly valued community needs and input for the project and have been collaborating with the other members of the community. And as part of those efforts, we initiated a shared project roadmap, which later became a community roadmap to identify what is being developed and their status across HiQ projects. And this is just a snapshot of the HiQ roadmap. You can see 4 or 5 different projects on the board, as well as Advancing HiQ at the moment. And we are just happy to see that community owned it and will remain up to date even after Advancing HiQ ends. And I just want to point out one last thing about this board. If you look at the deferred column, that displays the features which we couldn't tackle in the time frame of the Advancing HiQ project, as Ellen already mentioned. In the next slide, again, Ellen actually already touched upon that. I just wanted to remind ourselves with that deferred column, these features are for the community to decide whether there is still need for them or for another project to pick them up. As mentioned again by Ellen, preservation features are already with our HiQ consortium colleagues as a good example of constructive communication between HiQ community projects. Shortly after this talk, we will hear updates from HiQ interest group. So I think this slide is also a good shout out to that presentation in the context of what's next for the community. So for the next slide, and I will just finish here with a list of links to the project-related documentation. At this point, we're just looking forward to hearing your thoughts and any possible questions, Ellen and I, and possibly Elisa in the audience or in the Slack with me, so we can actually pick up your difficult questions if there's any. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilkay. We're ready for your questions, and I also want to take this opportunity while you're thinking of questions to express some appreciation to a couple of folks from Ubiquity Press. Particularly, I found out yesterday that significant work I wasn't aware of was done by Tom Molam at Ubiquity on our final report, and I just really want to express that appreciation. Elisa Barrett should be here with us today. If I can't see her in the participants, I hope she's here to help us answer some questions as well. I also want to say thanks to Chris Colvard, who reviewed our presentation and made sure that we didn't embarrass ourselves too badly. So thanks, Chris. Okay, did we put the link to the final report in the chat? Let's do that.
Let me just put that.
If you have nothing else to do this week, you can read all 62 pages of it.
Oh, I'm here now.
Hi, Elisa.
I was here, but I wasn't a panelist, I guess. So I could hear everything.
Yeah, anything you want to add to what we
Thanks
said?
for the acknowledgement. Yes, I mean, just to say that perhaps in the second last slide, the notification by the notifications of deposits by individual depositor are actually part of the kind of ORCID integration, so that when depositors deposit their own work, the same way as that work is updated inside the repository and it appears in there.
You're right. You're right, Elisa. And I should have acknowledged the work. Yeah, I should have acknowledged the work that we've done with work.
No, it's just that it's always been a little bit ambiguous because there's this difference between depositor and administrator. So the administrator administrators don't have an overview. I mean, they can do review submission, but they're not notified as a status report. But the individual depositors are. It's like kind of a fun, nice feature that might be useful.
Sounds good. I also want to acknowledge Rob Kaufman put something in the chat about Haiku 4 and ORCID, which is it's coming soon, but he doesn't think it will make Haiku 4.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, Haiku 5, Haiku 6, we've got lots of empty spaces. All right.
I wonder if we should go back and show some of the slides. Maybe it might make it easier for questions.
Sure. You want to go?
Maybe. I don't know.
I think there'll be a good conversation on the Slack. And I know that this community knows us well and knows where to find us. So if not, thanks a lot. And it's been fun.
Thank you all so much. That was excellent. It's so great to see all of your hard work reach this point. So congratulations also on all your success.
Thanks.
We're running just a tiny bit ahead of time. There I am.
Maybe sorry, Heather. Maybe we can just emphasize again that we did quite a lot of work to try and document and where the code for all the features is, and document also what we've done on the wiki. That's been linked in the last slide that Ilkay showed. And so just, I think if you're interested in any of this, just, you know, get in there, and our developers are also on the Slack and on GitHub, they're available. So if you have any questions, just try things out and see how it goes.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I'm going to hand things over now for another sort of Haiku update from Kevin.
Hello and good morning from the West Coast here. Let me get the right. Does that look good to everybody?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. I was really eager to see that update from the Advancing Haiku group. Normally I'd have more from them in this update, but it'd be a bit redundant. They did it much better than I could. So I'm Kevin Kochansky. I'm client liaison at softwareservicesbyscientists.com. That is formerly now Chait. So you'll get to hearing us, and we use shorthand as SoftServe as well. So let me move forward. I am chair of the Haiku interest group, which doesn't mean I'm powerful. It just means I coordinate information. So I am going to share some of that information back with you today. We have a healthy number of people here, so I'm going to assume that at least a few of you are new to the community, and if so, welcome. I'll very briefly explain that Haiku is a Samvera solution bundle. It's based on the Hyrax engine, and it takes components of Samvera and creates a turnkey application, which you've just heard quite a bit about, so hopefully you're a little acquainted at this point. It inherits everything from Hyrax since it's based on Hyrax, but it has some unique features, including multi-tenancy, some UI theming templates and other options, pre-built work types, bulk import and export pre-installed, and more built-in user management options, among other features. Some general updates as part of the Haiku interest group. We're grateful to have a pretty active community. So we get updates monthly from all of these projects listed here, which you'll hear a little bit more about individually. We'll tend to talk about roadmap and make sure we're aligned and not working at odds with each other. We've done a great job of sharing features back and forth. We'll get updates on Haiku releases and technical updates that come from the Haiku dev call, which also happens once a month. The interest group is more user focused and the dev call is more technically focused. We always welcome newcomers. You can just sit back and listen. You can ask questions. It's a really welcoming environment, like most things in the Samvera community, fortunately. And that is on Zoom the last Thursday of each month. Haiku 4.0 release is imminent, and we have overhauled the way local development and deployment is done. Docker and Helm setup has been consolidated to match the Hyrax format, so that aligns the community support around that better. Settings and environment variables are also better aligned with Hyrax, and there's been numerous bug fixes and some great features. Featured collections and uploadable collection thumbnails are now an option. That is to feature collections on our homepage. Cross-tenant search via the search-only tenant has been implemented, and support for multiple domain names is now provided. There's the ability to make individual tenants private, which is a variety of uses. And the theming options now include 3 custom homepage themes, 2 custom show page themes, and 2 search result themes. I had a slide about featured collections until I realized that Summer Cook is going to tell us all about that in just a little bit. So stay tuned till after the next break because there's nothing to see here. Bulk racks is always kind of part of the conversation with Haiku, since a lot of the bulk racks development is done in the Haiku world. This is a UI that allows you to create, edit, delete, run, and rerun imports. It's optional now behind a feature flipper since the last major Haiku release. Bulk rack supports CSV, OAI, PMH, XML, Baget, and an ever-growing list of formats. Work on it is continuing by SoftServe with GDH, UCSC, and the University of Louisville. And 3.0 is in beta for imminent release, which includes the ability to import collections and file sets with metadata. I am going to interrupt and ask folks, we are pulling together a bulk racks interest group. We're happy that bulk racks is in a place where it's getting adoption outside of software services by scientists.com and our clients. We want to make sure that this is a larger community conversation and that maintenance and development and roadmap items are aligned. So to get an interest group growing in Samvera land, we have to have names from at least 3 institutions or organizations on that charter. So please reach out to me on Samvera Slack or email me and let me know if you are interested in putting your name on that charter. Couple major grant projects. We just heard a great presentation about advancing Haiku, so thank you for that. That, of course, was a collaboration between British Library, Ubiquity Press, University of Virginia, and the Arcadia Charitable Fund. The best place to continue to get information for that is advancinghaiku.io. Haiku for Consortia is working with SoftServe. Palni and Palsy lead that, the library consortia, and they're currently running Haiku Commons as a multi-tenant repository service with an adaptable operational model. It's nearly doubled the amount of tenants since the update in Samvera Connect 21. They now have 13 tenants in production and 34 in pilot or test. And their goals are developing a robust user community across the 4 consortia that are now participating. And this includes Basecamp collaboration platforms, training sessions, monthly user group meetings, and they're working on a progress for collaborative feature prioritization. They were awarded their IMLS grant, Haiku for Consortia, Removing Barriers to Adoption, and user research to plan that work is underway. They've kickstarted development with work types and work type updates and UI enhancements. And the first major development sprint is happening now with SoftServe, and we're focusing on import and export improvements. Next up, they will be looking to dig into flexible metadata and analytics work improvements. They're continuing to refine a process to deal with bugs and maintenance issues, and they plan to share a draft of their operational model later this year. Other projects in development, I'll try to keep it fairly high level and move along, but University of Louisville has their digital collections, and they are now live in beta, and there's a link. They have, at least as of a week ago, about 20% of their content successfully migrated into Haiku. SoftServe has been working with them to adapt the Hyrax newspaper gem to allow imports of complex compound objects. Ubiquity Press, as you know, they've been focusing on wrapping and contributing advancing Haiku grant work back. This and other work they've been working on includes batch auto population through unpaywall and crossref, in-browser display of PDFs and annotation through Hypothesis, added the sync between Haiku author profiles and ORCID, Opera metrics for views and downloads, introduction of schema for main metadata fields looking towards the implementation of Allen's and Flex for flexible metadata, and bulk DOI minting utilizing bulk racks. National Transportation Library 3.0 is from the US Department of Transportation's Bureau of Transportation Statistics. We have had this, we've heard a bit about this for a couple years now. I'm really excited that stakeholders have started joining the interest group, so we're getting a lot of traction around this project. They have brought the application into their own servers and are currently undergoing security audits and other fun government processes. But just last week, SoftServe helped them complete the final migration of data, and now they are undergoing user testing on their own staging environment. And feedback from that process is going to hopefully inform a future phase that will help to get this application public. The Shared Research Library with CoSector, British Library, and SoftServe continues development. They've had a lot of exciting things going on. This includes that they've upgraded to the latest Haiku and have achieved parity. DOI integration is live with the latest bulk racks implementation installed as well. Cross-tenant search is live, and migration, they're currently undertaking a migration to a new server infrastructure. And some of the AHRC funded developments that they've implemented include the ability to add the feature collections, which we'll hear more about shortly from Summer. The theming template for BL shared service tenants, and enhancements to collections metadata and shared search UX. Another project in the community is the Adventist Digital Library. This is currently mostly in a maintenance mode as they wait to plan a new phase of work. So we'll look hopefully to have some exciting updates for that at Samvera Connect. And the Washington University in St. Louis Newman Numismatic Portal has overcome a lot of barriers with refining OCR and content ingests. Now we're happy to say that we're over halfway through upload of over 300,000 digital objects. And that includes a number of very high-res catalogs from Internet Archive, and that required a lot of performance optimization to get that working. Cantaloupe image server is going to be made as a standard option in Haiku out of this. Couple service solutions out there, U repositories by Ubiquity Press and SoftServe's Haiku Up are still in the landscape. And thank you. I'd love you to follow Haiku, join us. We have our own channel in Samvera Slack. Haiku.samvera.org is an informational site where whenever people speak at conferences, we try to get that site updated with links out to those presentations. And that's not just Connect, but that's open repositories and other forums. We do have our own Google list, and here's information for the interest group. It's 8:30 Pacific, the last Thursday of each month. And the developer call is the second Thursday of the month at 9 o'clock Pacific. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin, for that great update. I'm going to hand things over next to John Cameron for an update on Avalon.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Cameron from the Indiana University Libraries, here to do the Avalon update. I'm the product owner for Avalon, and I'll just be talking about what's new with us. So what is Avalon? Just our regular slide. So it's a Samvera solution bundle for audio and video access. It has a number of sort of quality of life features like easy transcoding, granular access control, and a lot of other things that are sort of specific to Avalon to meet its use cases. We've been supported in the past by grants from Mellon Foundation and IMLS. And our latest release is Avalon 7.3. So first I want to mention some team changes. So first of all, I want to say a welcome to Mason, who has just joined it. I think this is his second week. So he has just joined the Avalon team as one of our developers. Previously, before we hired him, he was working with Julie Hardesty on metadata coding projects, working in Python and other things. So please say hello and introduce yourself to our newest team member. We're excited he's joined. So also we have an open position. The position for head of digital media software development is still open with us. Jim Halliday is thankfully and wonderfully currently filling in since Maria Whitaker retired at the very end of October. And the link there is just a link to the job listing. That is still open, and if you have questions, you can contact Job Done. I do have some sad news to share, which is that our colleague Michael Johnson passed away suddenly and unexpectedly a few weeks ago. Michael had taken the role of senior developer on the Avalon team a little more than a year ago in February 2021. So, you know, he did a lot of work with us, and he also participated in the community. He did some community sprints and was working with Hyrax. So some of you, may have met or worked with him. He was, just a wonderfully nice person, a really good colleague, and he and his good cheer in the office are going to be missed. Donations in his memory, if you're interested, are for a college fund for his son. I'll post the link to the GoFundMe for that after the presentation. So to go back to, what's new in Avalon? Release 7.3 said is our latest, March 2022. We finally were able to get everything together to release this. So this includes our Google Drive support via Browse Everything and the integration of the transcript component from the Avalon IIIF React Media Player, and sort of the adding of transcripts to be sort of, first-class citizens to be added to sections and letting them render on the item page. A few other things that are in that are some, updated Docker build as sort of containerization becomes more popular, especially as an installation method. We're going to try to keep up with that. Ruby 2.7 support and a couple of fixes for some not so great bugs. So our transcript file viewer. So in the screenshot here, you can see transcripts are now a sort of a typed category that you can associate with a file in Avalon, along with captions. So you can add any number of transcript documents, and they can be in any arbitrary file format. But if you upload them specifically in the format of VTT or docx, it will render the transcripts on the item page. So the next slide here. So here's a lunchroom manners, our classic example. And on the right side of the screenshot, you can see the transcript viewer rendering. So it will always render with a list of the transcripts that are available on the item, and users can download them, which is just that binary file directly. And with VTT, timestamps will render and be able to be clicked and synced within the player. And yeah, it's all viewable there. And then again, if it is a Word document, there's a client-side library that we're using to transform the document into HTML. So it ends up looking really nice in that viewer. And it is, the actual Avalon IIIF React Media Player and the transcript component specifically. So this was nice to be able to finally see the outcome of sort of the componentization we're saying, hey, we have this React component that we're working on for some other things, but we also have this one piece of it that's integrated, easy to integrate directly in the application. And the transcript document, this will only render if a transcript document is present on an item or section. Google Drive integration is also part of this release. Unfortunately, as soon as we sort of got there, we found out we wouldn't really be widely adopting it at IU like I was hoping due to Google service changes. So it's kind of, made us think it's still worth it for at least one of our Avalon instances for people specifically who maybe outside of, the university system and don't have access to the same resources, but have Google accounts and can use that as a means of like file transfer. So it's simple to set up, but I think after we've done this, I think the concern that came up is, just maintenance in terms of difficulty in working with Browse Everything or continued support with Google perhaps changing its APIs or just sort of keeping that current and up to date could be a challenge that we weren't expecting. So I'm interested, if anybody is connecting to like OneDrive or other stuff, either through Browse Everything or some other means, I'd be interested to hear about that. And so what's next for Avalon? We have a bunch of stuff coming up. One is the migration of our Avalon documentation to the Samvera Confluence instance. So before we were using a sort of a local Confluence instance to do all of the documentation. And moving to the Samvera site is going to make it good for us because we need to migrate anyway. And then, just having the community documentation be there and be managed in that sort of same way is going to make life a lot easier, I think, for us in our documentation. And then Avalon 7.4, which is the next release we're planning with the big dependency updates, Rails, Bootstrap, and Blacklight, just like we've been going through with Hyrax. And so we're hoping to essentially just include those in this next release. Other things we're working on are controlled digital lending feature. We're working on a project with Michigan State University to implement controlled digital lending within Avalon so that you would be able to set an Avalon instance as controlled digital lending instance, and so letting people only view if they have checked out a particular piece of media, and then setting time limits and all the sort of stuff that you would usually expect in controlled digital lending. And then we continue to work on the Avalon IIIF React Media Player, actually now that it's directly in Avalon, and then continuing to work specifically with our support both for the generation, but also in consuming manifests and working on interoperability, as well as continue to build out the features that exist in our current media element-based player. And then, of course, continue to Hyrax work. The Avalon team has tried to take part in community sprints for Hyrax development work, whenever we can, with the idea that we still are moving to a Hyrax-based Avalon at some point, and basically, helping with Valkyrie and helping with other things, both to get our development team, more well-versed, but also just to move toward that goal. And so here's our contact and stuff. Our Avalon channel on Samvera Slack is a really good way to get a hold of us. Our mailing list, and then we also have, this page on our website, our Connect page, which has all the different options. So yeah, we would love to hear any questions or info if you want to talk. All right, thank you.
Thanks, John. There's a lot going on with the Avalon community. Thanks for that great update. Now we have a couple community updates before our break, and so I'll hand things over to Hannah first.
Hi, everyone. I am Hannah Frost, Assistant Director for Digital Library Services at Stanford University. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. Stanford lands are home to 65 prehistoric Native American sites, some known to be as much as 5,000 years old. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Wait. Can you see the slides?
I can see your, maybe the wrong screen can see your Slack.
Okay, that's not what we want to see. Stop the share. Try that again. Okay. There we go. Okay, can you see those?
Oh, just kidding. Hasn't quite
Oh.
loaded yet for me.
Sorry, y'all. All right, let's try this again. No. All right, I am sorry, I'm gonna do a monitor switcheroo. Okay, how's that?
Yeah, you can see it now.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. Sorry about that. Okay, so I am here to give the Samvera Community Guidelines Working Group update. So just a bit of background. Back in July of 2020, the Code of Conduct Working Group approached the steering at the time, the board, and got the green light to proceed with a code of conduct and community safety consultants to spend some money and get some help on developing out these things. In December 2020, we had incident response training, a select group of us. And then in March and November of 2021, in that time, the Community Safety Working Group got together and developed an incident response plan, reviewed our code of conduct and anti-harassment policy and made some changes. And we established a safety volunteer process. The final piece of all of this work was to develop our community guidelines. So the working group for that spun up in February of this year. So our consultant, Annalee Flowerhorn, says, community guidelines communicate your community's values and culture to new and existing community members. The reason to create specific guidelines instead of just saying be excellent to each other or treat each other politely is that there are a wide range of cultural norms across different communities, even micro communities like open source projects. So that sounds like us. The working group members included myself, Heather, Jessica Hilt from UC San Diego, Alicia Morris from Tufts, Robin Rugaber from University of Virginia, and Beth Sadler from Princeton. A great group. We had some resources to work with going in, including all of the work that had been done by the Community Safety Working Group prior. We looked at existing examples of community guidelines from other technology projects like Mozilla and Puppet. And we also looked and checked out what kind of community guidelines are used in social media land, TikTok, Nextdoor, and Facebook. But most importantly was the resource, a community guidelines guide that had been prepared by Annalee Flowerhorn for us. And I'm just going to call out a few things from that document very briefly, and I'll put a link to them in the chat when I'm done here, because it's a really interesting document and worth checking out if you're interested in thinking about how we talk about how we work together. So in discussing our values, the idea is to avoid generalities. Broad statements are less useful and can easily be interpreted to justify or condemn a wide range of behaviors. So it's important to be specific. It's important to separate reality from aspiration and clearly delineate between what's true of what your community is right now and what values your community is striving to live up to. There are guidelines to avoid, things that seem appropriate at face value, but actually raise some concerns, like assume good intent or bring your whole self or no interruptions. And there are some things she recommended, including clear, simple language, inclusive language, making space for quieter voices, and seeking out and centering marginalized and underrepresented perspectives, which I think a lot of our community safety work does well. So for the group, we took this approach. We decided that our community guidelines would be brief, that they were more likely be read and understood if they were concise and people would read them if they were short. We chose to just focus on 3 areas in the scope of our guidelines. And we wanted to articulate the values and how we work to live by them. And we also decided to be agile in the sense that we wanted to sort of get something out to the community as soon as possible, knowing that we can iterate over this over time. So our first area of focus was to be open and welcoming. So I just pulled out some for our 3 areas of focus, just really brief little excerpts to give you a taste of how we structured this. Samvera strives to be an open and welcoming place for our community. And we do this by, we seek to be open by using clear, simple language. Participation and collaboration. The Samvera community centers on participatory collaboration, and we do this by recognizing that each one of us helps set the tone for how we work and have fun together. And we thought it was important to talk about decisions and communication. Like how decisions are made in the community. We know if people want to contribute that transparency about decision making and being open is vital. So we put forth that we strive to make decisions in the best interest of the community as a whole. So our process, we just met twice, if you can believe it. We had discussion, built out an outline, and then from there, Jessica Hilt, thank you, developed our first draft. We made some minor revisions, then shared it with the board and the community, took in some feedback, all of it was positive, and then we went ahead and released the guidelines on April 15th, sunsetting the group after that. So if you have any questions, let me know. I see I went over a little bit, so feel free to post them in Slack.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks so much for all your work on that. I think we have best in class community guidelines and code of conduct, and that's no small amount of work went into that.
Thanks.
So I just have a very short update before we have another break. And my update is for a pretty new working group. I believe we've only met once, the Website Migration Working Group. So the Website Migration Working Group was formed by the Marketing Working Group as a subgroup to take on the task of moving the samvera.org website from its current state as a hosted WordPress site and making it a static site on GitHub Pages. And this move is going to allow for easier website management because changes can be made via a pull request in the Samvera GitHub repository. And it's going to reduce Samvera's operating costs slightly by eliminating the hosting and WordPress security costs. So this is a migration rather than a redesign. But as part of this move, the group is going to review and refine the website design in consultation with the Marketing Working Group. And the goal is just going to be to streamline some of the content and look at places where we would like to send users to the wiki for more detailed information. And this group is also going to document the ongoing maintenance needs of the website so that we can stay on top of that. So our goal is to complete this work by September of 2022, which is ahead of Samvera Connect in October. So that's the latest there. I've got 10 to the hour, so we're going to have a break and we will see you back here in about 10 minutes. All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're at the top of the hour and handing things off to Summer.
Sorry, I had to find the mute button. Hi, I'm Summer. I'm a developer at Software Services by Scientist.com, which was previously known as Notch 8. I'm going to talk about how we work to improve the functionality of collections in Haiku with a few features that were sponsored by the British Library. I'll start by introducing the developers who worked on these pieces. So it's myself, and I'd like to thank Tiffany Chan at the University of Victoria, who originally wrote the code for collection thumbnail uploads, and we brought it over and adapted it into Haiku. And then I also want to give a special thanks to my colleague, Braden Justice, a senior developer on my team, who also helped to bring collection thumbnail uploads across the line. And again, this work was first developed for and sponsored by the British Library and then was adapted for Haiku. And a little background on our client, the British Library. Their app is a shared research repository for several tenants, including the British Library, British Museum, National Museum of Scotland, Kew Botanical Gardens, MOLA, and Tate Modern. I'll go into some previous limitations on collection functionality in Haiku. So users previously could not specify which collections they wanted to appear on the homepage, and they used to show in order of whichever was the most recently added. And there was also no way to prevent a recently added collection from appearing on the homepage besides making it private. And some limitations for collection thumbnails were that thumbnails for collections were just determined by images and works. So you could choose a thumbnail for a collection, but your options were just whichever images existed as the default images for works within that collection. And being able to add custom collection thumbnails was a feature that was requested a lot by clients, to the point that some of our clients came up with a workaround that was to add a dummy work, and then that dummy work would include the image for the collection that they wanted, and then they would set that work to be the thumbnail for the collection. And so this was obviously not a very intuitive flow, so this tries to fix that. And also the thumbnail that was saved for works and applied to collections is very small, and so any theme that included a larger thumbnail for collections, it would just look very stretched, or you'd have to deal with that. So this aimed to fix that as well. I'll go into some of the improvements. First, for the featured collections feature, we utilized the code for featured works and then just modified it and adapted it to apply to collections, so that users are now able to select and feature whichever collections they would like to show on the home page. And users are also able to order the collections however they would like. And it allows a user to feature up to 6 collections. And the image that you see here shows the collections that the British Library chose to feature on their homepage. I can show you featured collections working in action in Haiku. So you'll see a user is able to remove a featured collection directly from the homepage. And then from there, they're able to visit the collection show page. And you can see feature and unfeature buttons right on that page. So they can add them or remove them here. And then these buttons are also present in the dashboard. And then if you go back to the home page, you'll again see that collection, and you're also able to reorder collections when you are logged in. And you'll click save order, and it will save that order for once you log out. then for collection thumbnail uploads, so this was originally implemented at the University of Victoria, and we utilized their open source code and brought it into the British Library's research repository. Then we adapted it back into Haiku and contributed it back. So with collection thumbnails, users are now able to upload any custom thumbnail that they want just directly from the collection edit form in Haiku. And they can also return to a default thumbnail, which was not previously able to happen. Or if they would like, they can still use a thumbnail from a work, which was the previous functionality. So that isn't removed at all. And then this just enables more flexibility and allows users to upload higher quality images for thumbnails as well. And this image is just the field that you would see in the collection edit form. I'll show you guys the action. So a pop-up will come up that allows you to choose an image from your computer. You can save it. And then after you save, the uploaded thumbnail will be displayed directly in the form so you can see what you did. And then if you do want to go back to using a thumbnail from a work, you can select one from the drop-down and click the clear upload button. So the uploaded thumbnail will always take precedence over a thumbnail chosen from the dropdown. And after you save this, you can see the uploaded thumbnail displayed throughout your app. And if you have any questions about how you can utilize these features for your Haiku or Hyrax project, feel free to reach out to me. It's my email, summer@scientist.com. Or in Slack. And then again, I just want to say thanks to Tiffany and Braden and to encourage everyone to make open source contributions when there are features that can be useful to the community as a whole. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Summer. Lisa, did you have a question? Go right ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, Summer. Thank you for that. It's really interesting. I just want to know if it's if you know if this will be available maybe in the next version of Haiku, or it's already is, or yeah. Thank you. Or it's a gem, or who knows?
It will be in Haiku 4.0. So you just would have to upgrade to the most recent Haiku.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
All right, if you have any other questions come up for Summer, feel free to get in touch and or also put them in the Samvera Slack. And thanks again, Summer. Now we will hand things over to Anna Marie and Julie.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen with the slides? Okay, great. So this is accessibility and metadata, how alt text affects the Samvera community. I'm Anne Marie Close. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And the second half of the presentation will be given by Julie Hardesty at Indiana University. So first off, like a lot of academic institutions, our universities have accessibility mandates because we want to serve all of our students, staff, faculty, and researchers. And accessibility efforts are really good for all users. And so when we share the links to these slides, you'll be able to get a link to our mandates. So in terms of accessibility, W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative mentions diverse abilities and barriers in relation to accessing the web. And these are diversity of abilities, auditory, cognitive, learning, neurological, physical, speech, and visual aspects. And within the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, it provides international standard. it provides an international standard for web accessibility and levels and compliance. And so what's great is some of us have been talking about alternative text, also known as alt text, transcriptions, captioning. Those have come up in earlier presentations, but we're going to focus on alt text for this presentation. So the old adage is a picture is worth 1,000 words, but alt text is really about 140 words, or is it? Because there's been some discussion that that 140 character limit with screen readers may no longer be an issue. And also it can be really hard sometimes to describe things down to only 140 characters. And here is one of my real life examples. In our digital repository, we actually do not have a description of this work. And for those of you to understand, this is a single cell comic strip from Richard F. Outcault, I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, in 1896, titled A Wild Political Fight in Hogan's Alley, Silver Against Gold. And there are a bunch of historical references in here. I had to do a little research to look up what this is about. Apparently it refers to the 1896 presidential election, but this is not something that somebody is gonna, automatically know without doing some research. So there's definitely some challenges here. Having worked with our curators here, I'm also aware that the central character that you see down below with the text O'Brien is the yellow kid. So there's a little bit of domain expertise also needed here. And I feel like a curator could write a whole lot in an exhibit about this, but we have to deal with this in terms of, thousands of images, and what do we do? And we also have a lot more metadata in our records. So is the whole metadata record useful? So some of the concerns then that come up is, what does the metadata creator need to know about the image in order to create alt text? What does the user need to know about the image? And how can we describe this image with alt text? Is 140 characters even sufficient, or do we need more? And that's really a hot topic at my institution. So I like to liken what's going on with alt text for digital collections as using the iceberg analogy. So there's certain things that might be obvious or might not be. So above the iceberg, we might be able to see who it is, what the action is, what it is. Color can be very important, especially for individuals with color blindness, where it takes place, emotion. But context can be really difficult. Again, it can often require research to understand what's going on here. And we've had whole hour-long conversations about what is the context in an editorial cartoon. So another thing to consider below the iceberg is the creator's intent, the implicit bias of metadata creators, because we do have that, domain knowledge, in terms of the amount of space we have with alt text, complexity versus brevity, and ambiguity regarding gender identity, race, ethnicity, and age. And we have a lot of stakeholders that really want to express those concepts, but a lot of times it's not obvious. So other barriers we face are staffing, funding, time constraints, content expertise, buy-in and institutional support. And I want to say that even if you have accessibility mandates, getting support for doing this work is not a given, at least in order to make it really usable. And I want to share an example. A lot of us have records that have more than one image. And in this case, we have some glass slides that were scanned in different ways. So you have the traditional view, which is the transmitted light image, and the reflected light image. And the reason why we have the reflected light image is you can see there's some text on it. Well, maybe you can't. That could be important to the researcher, but we don't usually describe things on a file level with the title. And so a question might be, is that something we need to be using? And Julie's going to talk about that more. So handing it over to Julie.
Yes, hello. So in terms of the technology that we're using in the community here, a Hyrax-based application can encounter images in various ways. So one of those is this example of a single image showing in a IIIF viewer. So in this case that I'm showing here on the slide, it's through the universal viewer. So where does accessibility in terms of the alternative text for images come into play here? Is it with the embedded viewer, and does the title that's expressed here on this image work to serve as that alternative text description? It might in this case, but it doesn't necessarily always work. So there's a IIIF manifest behind this viewer that might have information that could be used in addition to just the title. But there doesn't necessarily appear to be a standard way for providing that in terms of alternative text at this point, at least not that I've been able to come up with. So there may be information that's out there. If there is a pattern for this, then I think it's something that's worth working with the IIIF community to make that more prominent and potentially include that information in our Hyrax documentation. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So within Hyrax, this is showing the attached file list, the file set list. Within Hyrax, the attached files can have titles, and that might also serve as alternative texts, like Anna was talking about. But in this case, it's the file name, so it's that's not necessarily working as well. This production example that I'm showing here is actually Hyrax in a 2.x version. So the file set thumbnail that's showing here does not actually have alternative text on it. And I do think that newer versions of Hyrax have addressed this issue. So I think that is something that's been corrected. But how does a user even know to dig down this far in the page, if the viewer is above this and is not giving that information, that alternative text information about the content of the image being viewed in the first place? So next slide, please. So this example is another one. It's a little harder to figure out how alternative text fits in here. The viewer still provides a title, but that title isn't explaining that it's a transcript file or that multiple pages are involved. So there are other parts within the viewer that might give that context, but it's not really an alternative text sort of offering of information. So next slide, please. The IIIF cookbook does show that there are ways to provide transcript access alongside various formats like newspapers or audio and video. But does that serve the role of alternative text for accessibility purposes in this case? And it's possible, but in the IIIF cookbook, it's not really talked about in those terms. Next slide, please. So, and then back to Hyrax, looking at the file set list for this multi-page document. How does alternative text for images work with the file set list for this? So again, this example has file names for titles on this, on the file set, but should alternative text be provided here in some other way instead? So next slide, please. So digital collections are showing digital objects. So within Hyrax, we're seeing some places that alternative text might be possible or available on images, but how is that supplied? And how do we recommend that happening? Does that fulfill accessibility requirements? And does it actually increase accessibility for the digital collections that are accessed via Hyrax? Additionally, the IIIF viewer accessibility is something to consider. So how is alternative text for images supplied? If there's OCR or transcripts available for images with text, does that work for accessibility purposes? There's been discussion in the IIIF community about how to model transcript information so it can be made available in HTML or where description of the image should be expected, considering an alternative text style description of what the image shows or the transcription of text in the image or even both, and if that should be part of the manifest. If there are options via IIIF now, providing that information along with our Hyrax documentation would assist organizations evaluating Hyrax or Haiku when considering accessibility. So how much of this is an issue that the larger arena of digital collection software and institutional repository software is managing? Reviewing other paths taken might also help us provide guidance or make changes to what we're doing for enhancing access to digital collections served through Samvera products. Next slide, please. So this is coming out of conversations in the metadata interest group. And it might also be coming up in the roadmaps alignment group a little bit within Samvera. So a UX study could help identify gaps in accessibility around alternative text or accessible viewing of digital objects. If there are recommendations or documentation that the Samvera community can provide, or work that we can do with other communities like IIIF, that also seems like a good avenue to explore. If there are changes we need to make to Hyrax or other software products that we offer through the Samvera community, writing those up as issues in GitHub can help us prioritize and move that work forward. So next slide is just kind of, this is our contact information if you're interested in talking more about this or moving some of this along. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was excellent. I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation. Okay, I'm going to hand things over to Michael and David.
Hello, my name is Michael Klein, and I am here with my colleague David Schober from Northwestern University Libraries.
Hello, I'm David Schober.
In 2018, David and I delivered a talk on what was then our past 2 years of experiences reimagining, remaking, and refining our application development and deployment ecosystem. A lot has happened in the 4 years since our last presentation: new projects, new services, new deployment tools, and new architecture. So today we're here to provide some updates. The last time we were here, we had just started using Terraform for infrastructure management. Terraform being a tool that lets you write infrastructure as code and that lets you manage your infrastructure and keep it in a consistent state. We had started getting a feel for AWS, Amazon Web Services, and started using AWS native services for things like Elasticsearch and their relational database service instead of running our own servers. For that part, it was a joy not to have to worry about scaling for those services and maintenance and certain other issues. Elastic Beanstalk was working out okay. We still had a couple apps and still have a couple apps that rely on Solar Cloud. And stability was a bit of a problem with Solar Cloud. But just as we started thinking about, kicking back and celebrating with a couple mojitos, a global pandemic hit and we had to cancel the party. So we decided to just sit around and rethink our stack again. Several of the issues on this slide mirror the ones on the same slide 4 years ago, the ones that motivated our move from AWS CloudFormation to Terraform in the first place. Our Terraform code, which was maintained in a single monolithic repository, became brittle and unwieldy and just too big to manage. Small changes to one set of resources threatened to break other, sometimes unrelated resources. Much like last time, we started to make changes directly in the AWS console or from the command line because it was just easier and more expedient, and then figuring out how to automate them. Terraform has come a long way in the past 4 years, and so have we. Lots of things are different, but this last bullet point is completely unchanged for the 2018 version of this talk. Every manual change we made racked up technical debt because it had to be documented and repeated. So we were doing better, but it was still complicated. Elastic Beanstalk, the AWS managed server platform, still wasn't quite working for us. It couldn't handle Solar Cloud outages and replace nodes without breaking things. Its web and worker tiers were rather difficult to manage. Its multi-container Docker platform that we were using didn't always start up reliably, so we would have to intervene manually a whole lot. And there was just basically too much magic between us and our code. It made support complicated. Nothing was straightforward. We had to do things the Elastic Beanstalk way or no way at all. And small changes weren't always quick to deploy, just like changing a single environment variable on a running server might trigger a time-consuming redeployment of entire EC2 virtual machine instances, which was just not particularly easy for us. At the same time, we also started developing a new greenfield staff-facing digital collections management application we call Meadow. We were working on a brand new application stack with Elixir, a new programming language, Phoenix, a new web framework, GraphQL API with IIIF and Elasticsearch Index behind it. It's designed, in addition to its interactive operations, it's designed for bulk operations, for ingest, editing, and management. Those who have seen David's presentation on our preservation first approach can understand. For those who haven't, I recommend looking it up because it really speaks to the philosophy that we're working under. Both the collections and the assets in them greatly increased in size. We were dealing with more items, and the items we were dealing with were much larger in size. So that came with new requirements for load balancing and networking, including the ability to pass WebSockets through our load balancer for for GraphQL subscriptions and some pub/sub type architecture. And we also started offloading more types of work to native AWS services or things that we wrote custom, but in the form of serverless Lambda functions. Like our ingest pipeline is almost entirely made up of coordinated Lambda functions that allow us to scale our most resource-intensive operations horizontally without having to provision those resources inside the scope of our app container. So our core application can run lean, and we can just provision more resources on the fly as we need them, pay as for what we use, and let them go away when we don't need them. We're also using AWS Elemental Media Convert for our media transcoding. We also did a lot of refactoring of our infrastructure. I mentioned that big Terraform repository we were running that became impossible to manage. So now instead of one massive Terraform project, we now have about 10 smaller ones, which may not sound better, but it is. Each project inside is responsible for one service, one set of related services, or one application. The Terraform code for core services lives inside a shared infrastructure repo. But the Terraform code for each application lives in the application repo. So for our Avalon instance, the Terraform lives inside our Avalon repo. And for Meadow, it's inside the Meadow repo. This lets us maintain the infrastructure while we're maintaining the code, keeps a consistent sort of Git history. You can see what resources change while the code is changing. It allows you to deploy a tagged version alongside its infrastructure. That just the benefits are innumerable. And deploying in smaller chunks led to more manageable change sets so that we could verify visually the changes that were about to take place without having to read through screens and screens of changes, easier reversions to previous state if something went wrong, and much cleaner documentation for each piece. It does mean we have to keep our downstream dependencies well documented so that if we change something, say in our data services infrastructure, we make sure to also redeploy the apps that depend on the data services infrastructure so they get their new settings. But we've been pretty good about that. And it makes it pretty easy to keep the entire stack in sync. We also got off of Elastic Beanstalk's multi-container Docker platform and went straight to Amazon's Elastic Container Service, where we can run containers directly on infrastructure managed entirely invisibly to us by AWS. Everything that used to be a server is now a scalable number of tasks grouped as services within AWS Elastic Container Service. Spin-ups and shutdowns are pretty quick. The technology behind it is called AWS Fargate Serverless Compute Engine. And just lets us run our containers without having to manage the servers they run on. No more EC2 instances to manage, just containers in the cloud. We're still considering whether we have a use for Kubernetes via AWS offers an elastic Kubernetes service as well. But so far, ECS is doing everything we need really well. So we haven't found a compelling case to switch over. As for things that aren't containers, we still use managed AWS services when possible. We use their relational database service for PostgreSQL, their Elasticache service for our Redis cache. We use Elasticsearch, which we've now moved to Amazon's OpenSearch, which is a fork of Elasticsearch. Their queue and notification servers to coordinate some of our asynchronous operations, and the aforementioned media convert for transcoding media. Other services like our IIIF server, anyone who's seen my serverless IIIF presentation knows that we've invested pretty heavily in serverless APIs to run IIIF. We also have an index data API that sits in front of Elasticsearch, and those are coded in Node.js that run as serverless functions invoked by REST APIs managed by AWS API Gateway. We also created a scalable checksum generator using AWS step functions. Most of our TIFF images are in the 5 to 20 megabyte range, but every so often we have a batch of 3.5 gigabyte TIFFs, or now that we've added support for audiovisual resources, some of our assets might even be multiple terabytes in size. Before step functions, we had to choose between letting those large items fail or be reprocessed manually or offline, or even not be able to be processed in the cloud at all because of resource limits, versus tuning our functions for the largest known case, which wastes resources on all of the smaller ones. You know, if you provision your Lambda for the 3.5 gigabyte TIFF, 1,005 megabyte TIFFs running through are going to waste a lot of CPU and RAM that they didn't need. We also shifted checksum generation so that it happens at upload time. The step function is triggered by the upload and just adds some tags to the object in our storage, S3 storage. And that works well with our preservation first strategy by seeding the initial fixity data even before a file is officially ingested into our repository. It also speeds up the synchronous part of the ingest process by performing one of the more potentially time and resource intensive functions in the background. And it also gives us some visibility into the process in real time. So given the success of that, we are looking into on our roadmap replacing our entire existing ingest pipeline dispatcher with step functions, which would basically coordinate our existing serverless ingest pipeline functions better than we're currently doing it in our custom Elixir code. Quick digression into step functions. A step function is a declaratively defined state machine. There's this visual editor for development that looks a lot like this image here. You can drag and drop and point things to new states and set conditions and design it based on your flowchart. It can also export to a YAML syntax for repeatable deployment. It can coordinate complex functions. It can invoke or evaluate nearly any AWS service API that you give it access to. It gives you easy visualization of both success and failure paths. This diagram shows a successful checksum generation. There's detailed logging for each step of each run, and the timeout can be set as high as 1 year. So if you have long-running operations or even functions that have to wait for external conditions to be met, like somebody to sign off on something, step functions can handle all of it. As for cost, from January through March of this year, we migrated thousands of hours of video from our audiovisual repository into Meadow, and we ingested a whole lot of images as well, overall adding 43,000 file sets into 8,100 works. We generated checksums for all of them on the fly, and the total cost for those three months was about $9. We've also revamped our development environment somewhat. Here we are pretending that any of us still actually sit next to each other. This is so new, it's not even rolled out to the whole team yet. The only person using it has been me, but each developer is going to have a dedicated EC2 instance. We will have a shared scalable Postgres instance running with separate databases for each developer. Costly resources like those EC2 instances and the database engines scale up on demand and scale down when idle. Each environment will have its own full set of resources to allow for independent work, but also easy collaboration. It has seamless integration with Visual Studio Code via the official remote SSH extension. So working in the cloud feels almost exactly like working on my laptop. And it also offers quick and easy seeding of production data into the development environments by just copying over relevant data and database records from our production environment, which we have read access to from the development environment. So we've made some discoveries. In 2018, we pointed out that containers aren't virtual machines. And we pointed out that that's both a benefit and a bit of an inconvenience. When we moved our containers off of EC2 instances, we gave up the ability to get a shell, an interactive shell on or near the container. But it turns out that AWS offers a service called Systems Manager that provides an easier, more secure way to drop into a shell or run another command inside the container. And we can also send shell commands or scripting commands directly to multiple running containers at once, either by their IDs or by a set of tags. Just, everything, send this command to all systems that match this set of metadata. Really quickly, David loves dashboards. So we iterate on them just like code. When we have an incident that could have benefited from some logging or metrics we didn't have easy access to, we add it to the dashboard, or even better, create an alarm to watch for the condition that will notify us when it happens. It gives us insight into running tasks, the health of the overall system and each resource within it, near real-time cost information, logging, information, where we've discovered that choosing what not to log is sometimes even more important than choosing what to log. If you can see this particular one down at the bottom, our combined Elastic Container Service task log is full of Rails deprecation warnings and little else. So it makes it hard to find what we're actually looking for. And on the right side, it gives us some documentation at a glance, just some static links and info that are useful in situations where we need to move fast. In conclusion, we've discovered that cloud native development allows us to be agile in just about everything. Developing in the cloud makes it remarkably easy to prototype, stand things up, tear things down, try things out. We're fortunate to have a university environment and central IT that is committed to the cloud and the resources to make the most of it. Cost management is for managers, but cloud pricing can be very tricky, and it can sometimes be good for developers and staff users to be able to see exactly which things cost money, so that we can figure out where to expend the effort to tune things. And filtering is important. Don't spam your developers or their Slack channels. Be selective about what you choose to alert on. Real-time development is tricky. You need live data. Doing end-to-end testing requires having a full environment stood up, and mocking and emulation can only go so far when you're trying to do a real-world test. So it's been great for us. And here we go. Use our stuff. We have a bunch of public repositories, a bunch of Docker images. We try to document well. Most of what we have is pretty specific to our needs and tied to our environment, but hopefully is pretty adaptable. And here's some contact information if you want to get in touch with either me or David or anyone else on the team with questions or comments or anything else.
Excellent. Thanks to you both for that great update. I hope you feel that you now deserve that mojito, even if you can't have it together.
We'll get there.
Great, thanks so much. All right, we're going to round out our day now with a presentation from Paul.
Hi. Okay, I seem to have hit a problem with the Mac operating system refusing to let me share my presentation, which it's never done before. Okay, I'm going to have to quit Zoom and come back, but I believe it will work when I come back. Sorry about this.
All right, no worries.
All right, I'll try again.
Oh, looks great.
Okay, sorry about that. Not a great start. Okay. Hi, well, thank you for the opportunity to present on this. I'm going to talk about a project which is being run by the Confederation of Open Access Repositories that I act as a consultant to, technical consultant. So I'm going to try and give a rapid overview of what we're doing and give you an idea of the sort of direction we're going. There's unfortunately, I've received information today that it looks like we have received some very significant funding for this, but I'm not allowed to talk about it today, which is a pity. But you should hear about this fairly soon if you're interested in following this. So, okay, I'm going to give a quick context to what this project is really about. So, we're sort of happy to have a globally distributed network of repositories, and this has come about through almost by accident in some respects. The sort of institutional open access repositories and the peer review, the preprint repositories which we have growing up now, and people moving into data repositories and so on. And all of this is quite naturally resistant to the sort of monopolistic capture and control that we've tended to see in scholarly communications in particular, and some of the domains that we work in. So that's an important point to make, I think, by way of context. And then the other thing is we have the web and all of the open standards, which are now quite mature. And a lot of these open standards, which some of which I'm going to talk about, are important, not just because they're open and mature, but because they're also mainstream. One of the weaknesses of some of the domains that we work in the past, I'm thinking about the sort of things which we used to call the digital library space a while ago, was we tended to invent new protocols and standards and technologies which were never mainstream. But actually we now have a range of mainstream standards we can use, and we don't need to go down that road. So there's an opportunity which we see, which is that the perceived importance of repository content seems to be growing. Preprints are becoming more important again, and this is great news for a number of open access initiatives. We have a growing number of data repositories and other content types, and we're starting to see services appear which are aiming to exploit that open access repository content in a good way. So that's the context, really. There are some strategy, sort of some principles behind the project, which I want to just go into quickly. So we're really interested in not so much in connecting and integrating repository systems, so much as integrating the resources in the repositories with resources elsewhere. So this is taking what's called a resource-oriented view of the world, which is natively supported by the web and all of the web technologies anyway. In programming, we have this this notion of passing by reference or passing by copy, where you either shift information around en masse or you pass pointers to that information. And the web allows us to pass by reference by essentially using URLs for everything. So what we're interested in doing is connecting up resources in repositories with resources in other systems or other repositories even, by linking those URLs together, creating bidirectional links. We want to take advantage of the distributed network of systems nonetheless, and that reduces or maybe even removes our reliance on centralized services. And finally, we want a general solution. So one of the other problems with, I've been working in and around repositories for quite a long time now, and I've seen a lot of projects come and go where the technologies are interesting, but there's a significant cost to maintaining things. Each time a new integration or a new API becomes attractive to repositories, there needs to be more development to support those APIs. What we're looking for is something which can be reusable. Repositories tend to exist in a fairly low resource conditions often, and there isn't a lot of money or time or available effort to keep developing solutions. So something which can be highly reusable is a very attractive thing to us. So the technical approach which we've selected is to use two available W3C standards. So the first and the sort of fundamental one is linked data notifications, which is a very simple protocol supporting asynchronous messaging between systems. So it has this sort of logical structure in that diagram in the middle of the slide there, where systems have an inbox, they can receive notifications, or they have access to an inbox, sorry, they can receive notifications in that inbox, and then they can consume them and do something with those notifications. And similarly, they can send notifications. I'll talk about the makeup of those notifications in a second. But the other important standard to refer to here is called Activity Streams 2, which is essentially a vocabulary for describing interactions on the web between agents and resources. And we have found that it pretty much supports the use cases that we have with some minor additions. So we're very much relying on that. So I'm going to talk about, go through an example use case very rapidly, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to achieve. So if you imagine that you have a repository and a peer review service, and we're just going to map out a very simple use of notifications to enable peer review. So the repository has a preprint in it, that's the little green box there. And the preprint has a URL, which is URIP, we're calling it there. Both the repository and the peer review service have implemented W3C's linked data notifications, so that each of them has access to an inbox for receiving notifications and an ability to send them. So you'll see those two little boxes on each service. So the first thing that happens is the repository sends a notification to the peer review service requesting the review. So it sends a very simple payload. I can show you an example of that in a moment. But crucially, it includes the URL to the preprints that it's asking to be reviewed. That's sent as a notification, a linked data notification to the peer review services inbox. And the peer review service does whatever it needs to do to decide whether or not it wants to attempt to review that preprint. There's some discussion there. All of that is out of scope of our project. Whatever mechanism or procedure is needed to happen there happens. And in this case, the peer review service decides that it will initiate a review of this resource. So it sends an acknowledgement back to the repository saying that it has agreed that it will initiate a review. So the repository at that point can do whatever it wants to do. One thing it might wish to do is to label that resource as being under review, perhaps to stop the resource from being added to another review service in the meantime, pending the current review. It might want to indicate this is happening to users of the repository resource. It might wish to communicate this to the author, perhaps. It's up to the repository. Again, this is out of scope for our project. What we're trying to do is enable the messaging between the systems. So time passes and the review service organizes a review, and eventually a peer review is created. That's the blue box on the right there, and you'll see that that also has a URL. So that's URI R. And having created that, the peer review service uses the notify protocol to announce that review together with the URI to that review back to the repository. So that goes to the repository's inbox. And then the final stage is that the repository is then able to update its records, do whatever it wants to do to indicate to users that this has been reviewed. And crucially, it now has a URL to a review that it can include on its splash page or in the metadata for that item. And the peer review service obviously has a link to the thing which it has reviewed alongside its review. So these two are now linked to each other, these two resources within these services. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at some patterns to give a sense of the sort of payloads which are sent around in these notifications. So the payloads are RDF, that's a requirement of the linked data notification standards. It doesn't specify which serialization format is required, but JSON LD seems to be the accepted norm now for this. And indeed, all of the examples that are given of activity streams to payloads are in JSON LD. The idea really is that there's very little metadata is sent between systems. The idea is to keep that as minimal as possible. The point really is to pass by reference so that if people want to get access to rich metadata, then what they can do is follow the reference back to the source, back to the system which has that metadata. So you'll see on the right, there is an example of a payload, and that's the entire payload, and it's essentially a series of URLs. I'm not going to go into each of the different parts of that in detail because I won't have time to do that in this talk, but it's all well documented and I can give you the link to the documentation. We've added very little to the on top of activity streams too, and in fact the snippet of JSON LD code on the left underneath the bullet points, that is the entirety of what we've added so far. Okay, so everything else is in mainstream standards vocabularies. We've defined some patterns, some reusable patterns, and we've defined a number of these patterns. So things like requests and acknowledgements and announcements of things. And these again are completely documented in this form. So you'll get an example JSON payload for each pattern and an explanation of what those properties refer to. The kinds of properties which are included are all defined in activity streams too, but things like the origin and target describe the two systems which are engaged in this communication. We have an actor, which is sometimes a service, but can also be a person if a notification exchange is initiated by an author, for example, then that could actually be a person. We have a number of IDs of different resources. And we have some fairly thorough ways of describing resources to allow for things like multiple identifiers for things such as typically in repositories, we might have a metadata page and a canonical URL for citation, a DOI, something like that. Possibly even a file URL to get directly to a PDF for a preprint, that kind of thing. So we have ways of encoding all of these in a standard way. Another thing that's worth noting there is that it's possible to have an in reply to. So this is a way in which the notifications themselves are linked together. So this notification is in reply to a previous offer. This is how the various systems involved can track the transaction, if you like. We've also found a way of mapping out scenarios. So this is quite similar to the use case I went through earlier, but this is laid out in a form which allows you to inspect the documentation. So this is using the kind of swim lanes approach from process modeling. So there's a system on the left, a system on the right. The notifications are in the middle, and each of those is a step, each notification, and you can drill down into those to see the actual properties which are being exchanged and so on. And we have about 10 or 12 of these we've documented so far. A quick note on the supporting infrastructure. So we've got the documentation which I've just described. So that's all openly available. And we've also developed some test inboxes so that there's a place for people who are just beginning development with this to be able to send notifications and see the results. It's fairly lightweight sort of test infrastructure, but it's been somewhat useful to some of the participants so far. A very quick word on implementations. So far we have several active developments. So DSpace 5 and 6, there's been a platform development there to working in conjunction with a national research organization in Portugal to enable notify between the DSpace repositories and I believe it's a kind of reporting system in Portugal. Dataverse, so Harvard University are working with Dataverse to implement notify communications between a Dataverse data repository and their main university publications repository. So this is linking a publication to a data set, for example. And HAL is the national level repository in France. And so HAL have integrated with the other two systems listed there, Peer Community In, which is a peer review, open peer review system, and Epicence, which is an overlay journal. And then we have other people who are considering development and have been involved in the project but haven't started development yet. So in Venio, we're talking to, and people at Zenodo specifically. DSpace 7, I believe, is definitely going to go ahead because Harvard have an interest in that too. And we're actively talking to Humanities Commons, which be an interesting use case involving Fedora and WordPress, I believe. Some other systems that have talked to us and are very interested, I think, are kind of waiting to see how we progress before they commit, but I think they probably will. Our pre-review, which is a peer review service, and eLife have a system called Society, which is a kind of aggregation of information about events which have happened in scholarly publishing, such as something being published or a review being made or something like that. So my plea to the community is, can we involve Samvera and Hyrax in this? And that's really all I have to say, and I've managed to land it bang on the hour, so I'm quite happy with that. Please go ahead and email me if you're interested in finding more.
Thank you so much, Paul. I hope this is a beginning of a conversation.
Thank you.
That we can be in touch. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. We'll have another day of great updates and information and same time. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.